have heard about all those big firms, and we want to know how to handle them. And what I'm going to do is to list some of the challenges in doing that. So when I grew up a while ago at MIT, taking Dick's courses and Paul Trosco's courses, that was simple. So we had regulation of natural monopoly. The rest was called antitrust. And basically, industrial policy was a source of shame for the family. And you know, that technology has evolved, and also we have neglected topics as usual, and there is a blurring of lines between regulation and antitrust. Actually, those platforms, they look very much like utilities, you know. I mean, that was said this morning several times, low marginal costs, high fixed costs. At the same time, we are seeing now a comeback of industrial policy. And something that makes things interesting too, given our current state of knowledge, is that a lot of the challenges we face have to do with agreements among firms that may otherwise compete. So it's kind of competition stuff. So firms which might compete actually may, in various ways, have to cooperate with each other. We know that for IP sharing, like patent pools, cross-licensing, research on ventures, standard setting, data pools tomorrow, collective negotiation, when you, for example, have a big supplier, the buyers may want to get together. You have common ownership. I think Florian is going, or Bruno is going to talk about it this afternoon. Lobbying, when I say public good, of course, it's public good from the point of view of the players who cooperate. And you know, there are actually efficiency reasons for doing all of that, but there are also problems with that. So we want to know whether you get too little or too much cooperation in some way. And we need a guiding principle, and if possible, information light rules. And that's really a big challenge, because sometimes we don't have quite the data to actually assess what to do. Okay. There's also a challenge for regulatory institutions. One is a bit on the side, which is that all certain dominant platforms like Google and Facebook are become media companies, and of course that raises the issue of politics. But more importantly, for what I'm going to say, the antitrust is not that good nowadays, because things are going very fast. We don't have the data. Antitrust is way too slow. At the same time, it's fair to say that all-style regulation doesn't work either. I mean, actually, we don't even try. And there are good reasons for that, at least two good reasons. The first is that those are global firms. If you think about, when I was taking Dick's course, that was simple. There was a domestic telecom monopoly or electricity company or railroad company. Now they are global firms. So who is going to regulate them? What would be the rate of return? Who is in charge of actually getting cost recovery or the like? The second issue is that it's moving fast. The railroad technology hasn't changed for 100 years or more. Whereas this is moving very fast, and actually we don't follow the firms along their life cycle. So sure, you can say Google makes a huge amount of money, and we can discuss whether it's right or wrong. But there's of course not everybody becomes a Google, and then you have to factor in the probability of success. We have no clue about it. It's a little bit like a drug in a sense, if you wanted to do a rate of return regulation or performance-based regulation on drugs, it's not that easy, of course, because you don't follow the firms. For all those practices, you worry about too much cooperation, but we also worry about too little cooperation. And one example of that is vertical contracting. So typical feature is that you have a core. I mean, in the old time, we'll have called that an essential facility or a bottleneck or an upstream infrastructure or something like that. And those are two-sided markets. All the big firms in the world nowadays are two-sided markets. So they try to attract consumers and some sellers or some third-party merchants. Maybe it's in-house as well. And that raises three kinds of issues. The first is both actually on both sides, you have the issue of transparency. I'm going to cite EU examples because, you know, I think in Europe we're a bit ahead in terms both of privacy regulation, but also antitrust. So there's something about transparency, how those algorithms rank things. I mean, is that the best thing for consumers or for the platform? Then there is on the merchant side, you have the issue of fair access, fair compensation. And on the core side, there is the issue of contestability. I mean, can you have a new platform coming in? And the core is defined in the recent DMA, the Digital Market Act, in a very wide way. So it could be the search engine, a marketplace, an app store, social network, video sharing, and so on. And we worry about, you know, contestability, what we could do actually to make it such that an efficient entrant could enter. And I will come back to that. Now the Chicago School, of course, says, you know, that's all right. Don't worry. The platform has no incentive, at least, to deny access to the merchants or to the apps, or more generally to treat them badly. Because if it were to do that, it will shoot itself in the foot. If you have a better or richer ecosystem, then you can charge more to the consumer for access to the platform. And it's a little bit like Modigliani-Miller. You know, it's very wrong, but at the same time, it's very useful because it forces you to structure your thinking. And actually, I like it in a sense, even though I completely disagree with it, because it really makes you think. Now, what's wrong with the Chicago School argument? One of the things is that, you know, the standard thing is that, you know, if you have better ecosystem for apps, for example, or complementary services, then of course you can charge more to consumers on core services, okay? Assuming you charge a positive price. Of course, that was the old story about regulation. When your core services are regulated themselves, you cannot raise the price on core services if you offer better apps or better complementary services. A second issue with the Chicago School argument is contestability and whether, you know, the essential infrastructure might want to remain an essential infrastructure, not be replaced by a competitor. So you want to erect barriers to entry in the core market. So one of the strategies you can use is to kill a number of apps or third-party apps so that if an entrant enters in the core market, then there won't be apps to deal with, so that the Carlton-Wellman theory, for example, of apps barrier to entry. The other thing that may happen is that you may want to acquire companies, and those are preemptive mergers. And what's today a complementer may actually become a competitor. So you might buy either a substitute or a complement, because in both cases, you might face a competitor in the core market so, you know, tomorrow. And that was actually the essence of the Microsoft browser case. Regarding point B, by the way, when I learned IO or economics, that was simple. There were complements and substitutes, and that was so simple. Unfortunately, there is no such thing as complements and substitutes, and the distinction is being blurred now because the products they are morphed into new products. So you know, the complement may become a substitute. There might be different usages. You know, you might be a complement for some and substitute for other. And furthermore, in a number of cases, whether you're complement or substitute depends on price. Finally, there are anxieties on third parties, and that's the case of best price guarantee, or MFN clauses. And we'll discuss that later on. Okay, so a little advertising for Europe, the Digital Market Act, which was just enacted. And refocus is not so much on transparency, and so you understand whether you get the best deal from the recommendation, but more on contestability and equity. So contestability, can a more efficient entrant enter the core market, and equity, do the users, in particular business users, receive a fair share of their contribution to the ecosystem? And do they have equal access? Nowadays, you know, especially on the equity side, there is this American Innovation and Choice Act, which very much emulates the DMA. So I'm not going to go through that. Now, competition is big, as you know. Of course, you have extreme cases. So you could have pure player platforms like Airbnb, which doesn't own any apartment, and therefore it's kind of neutral player. It's a marketplace, but not a player in a complementary segment. But that's pretty rare. And you know, most often you have some kind of competition where the platform is also in the market and not just operating the market. And Amazon Marketplace is a good example, but there are others. And the other extreme is, of course, vertical integration, where you don't have any third-party suppliers. Now, it's pretty rare as well, but Apple was as close as it comes to this kind of vertical integration. Okay, so DMA talks also about protecting contestability. So, you know, beside this prohibition of tying between core services and other services, the DMA also wants to allow multi-homing, so no exclusivity requirement, which makes a lot of sense, of course. You know, if you think about Uber versus Lyft, if Uber started asking exclusivity from the drivers, I'm not sure how long Lyft will survive. You know, the drivers will go to Uber, and then the consumers will go to Uber, and of course, the consumers can keep multi-homing. Also, they do that more in the US actually than in Europe, I believe. So multi-homing is really key, but that has a number of implications. So, for example, the DMA insists on the fact that business users should be able to indicate other channels through which the users can deal with them. So facilitating disintermediation, facilitating switching as well. So imagine that you are a Facebook customer and you wonder whether you want to move to this new social network. The question is whether you have your pictures, you have your posts on Facebook and so on. So can you take them? So technically it's feasible actually, but there are issues. I mean, it's feasible for you, but not for me, because I'm a waste basket when it comes to computers. But also, you know, I may want to leave Facebook, but I'm not sure. I may want to multi-home, or I may want to, if I'm not pleased with the new platform, I want to come back to Facebook. So there is a dynamic portability, which is important as well. And DMA is going in that direction. I don't know the exact detail, but it seems important. There is this concern about data barrier to entry in the core market, which DMA is still a bit vague, but is trying to address by the prohibition of combining data from different sources or obtained from third parties. It could be Google, it could be Facebook. I mean, you know, there will be restriction on Facebook using data from WhatsApp, for example, even so that's the same business. Okay, and then there is all this stuff about interoperability, and you know, that rings a bell. That goes back to the old telecom issues on interoperability. So that's actually interesting. So contestability. So when we grew up, when I grew up, there was Baumol-Panzar-Willig, which was insisting on hit-and-run entry, which gave you, so basically you could, if you set a price which is above average cost or Ramsey price, an entrant can enter very quickly and charge a lower price. Of course, usually prices, we think of prices as being more flexible than investments, but so in any case, that meant, you can be a monopoly basically, but not have any market power. There are dynamic versions, which are a bit more complicated, where you have consumer inertia and network externalities. The welfare effects are more complex because, for one thing, if it's dynamic, you get when a new entrant enters the market, and replaces at least in part the incumbent, then you have stranded consumers. So the consumers of the incumbent actually have a lower network, a smaller network, and that's not very good. But there are benefits from contestability nonetheless, because the incumbent are kept on their toes, and that's basically a Baumol-Panzar-Willig idea. They have to charge low prices, not because they can be hit and run entry, but because they want to build a big network and erect barriers to entry, basically. If any of them might also want to innovate. Now, what's wrong with contestability theory? I mean, it's not that contestability, the idea is wrong. I mean, actually, it's good. I mean, if you can keep the incumbent on its toes, it's wonderful. But, the efficient entrant may not be able to enter, and that's, that has to do with the barriers to entry. Or it may be able to enter, but it's not going to enter because it's going to sell out to the incumbent. So that's the defensive acquisition part. Okay, so now 6 challenges for you. I'm not sure I will cover the 6, but and I'm sure you have, in this laundry list, I'm sure you have many other challenges that you are going to ask. But it's amazing how little we know, and I think we need both on the theory side and on the empirical side. We have to make progress to help the policymakers deal with those. So something which has been emphasized a lot in the last few years is most favored nation clauses. And there, so I drew a diagram, which is a standard diagram. Think of the platform as being booking, for example, and you are a booking user, and then you book an hotel or something like that. It's a nice service. You find what you want. The problem is that the hotel will have to pay, say, 20% of the hotel room price to booking. Now, fine, but the hotel will have to pass through this fee, this merchant fee, and then it might pass it through to the booking customers, but unfortunately, booking is going to insist on the most favored nation clause, so that you cannot charge more to booking customers than you charge to an Expedia customer or if you have a direct sale. So that's one of the rare rare cases in which actually you can tax your competitors. And I think it's a wonderful idea, that's a dream for any firm to be able to tax the competitors, because those 20% will be actually paid a little bit by your own consumer, but will be paid by all consumers. So that has raised some questions, of course. We already face the issue with payment cards, by the way, because we have the no surcharge rule, which is basically a similar idea. And this is a very thing. And by the way, it's going to be all over the place. I mean, your Alexa, your personal Alexa, your personal assistant, of course, is there not only to get data from you, but also to charge a doctor you're going to call, or the pizza which will be delivered to your home. That's what it's about, no? And there's been reactions to that, especially in Europe. So for example, actually Emmanuel Macron 6 years ago went against the MFNs, but similar things were done in Germany, in Italy, in the UK, and in Sweden, basically by saying, no, you are no longer able to use MFNs. It's not allowed. Sometimes the platform decided to abandon MFNs. Actually, I think in the US, Amazon doesn't use MFNs anymore. So it's voluntary. Now, if you think about why it's voluntary, one of the reasons is that it's actually the prohibition of MFNs is actually pretty ineffective. It's pretty ineffective because The merchants still, even though they are not forced to give a best price guarantee, they de facto give a best price guarantee because they are very concerned about being delisted. So, if Amazon actually sees that you are charging much less on another platform, then Amazon will delist you. And at least there's some evidence of that. The Musolf and Lee paper, I guess. But people have said that informally, that, you don't want to get into violation of MFNs because otherwise you'll be, the algorithm is not going to recommend you anymore. The other thing, which is, you don't even have to make it implicit. Actually, you create preferred merchant programs, and you say, okay, you agree to MFNs, and then in exchange, you'll rank higher in the algorithm. And since it's an option, you are not forced to do it. It's an option, so it's legal. It's kind of funny, but anyway. The other issue with the prohibition of MFNs is that actually they have also good features. I don't like MFNs, but they also have good features, which is that they protect against holdups either by the consumer or by the merchant. So the case of holdup by the consumer is the old showrooming argument, which has been used to explain RPM, for example, to validate that, to vindicate RPM. So I go to booking, I'm looking for an hotel room in Boston, and then I found the exact hotel I wanted, and then I call the hotel directly because it will be cheaper on the hotel website. So it's basically expropriating booking. But conversely, the merchant can expropriate you. So just if you book a flight on a low cost for $20, and then you notice that you have to pay 15%, $15 on your credit card payment or something like that, after spending half an hour calling your family and filling out all the forms, and then you discover in the last screen, of course, that you have to pay for using a payment card. So that's the reverse holdup. So in a sense, MFNs have some good properties. And the challenge, and this is for you, the challenge is really to find better regulation than just prohibition, which, as I said, don't work very well. And to do that, you'll have to take two-sided markets seriously, which almost every court now pretends to do. So I'm afraid we get a lot of citations from the courts. But when you look at the details, that they explain, they often explain actually it's one market. It's not, there is not a market for consumer and a market for merchants. It's actually one market. So far, so good. But then they say, hey, what matters is the total price. Whereas in two-sided market, the important thing is the allocation between the two sides. So one of the things which is difficult but will be much better will be some kind of price regulation. So you regulate the price of access. So, is a 20% booking or 30% Apple fee, is this the right level? Okay. Well, that was addressed for payment cards, which is basically putting a cap on surcharging, right, in some countries. And in the EU, they actually use a Pigovian approach. Why Pigovian? Because the one who decides whether to use a payment card, if it's accepted by the merchant, is actually the consumer. So basically, the idea is to have the consumer internalize the externality on the merchant. It's called the convenience benefit, and it has been that's called the tourist test in the literature, but basically it's being used by the EU. But this is one of the rare examples where they try to get at some price regulation of the access price, which is a very standard issue in regulation, but in IO is less so. And there is a recent paper which goes a little bit beyond, in a case in which the platform also brings information. So you go beyond the convenience benefit and you add the informational benefit. But the truth is that we know very little about those things. So the future of regulation here is going to be, we'll have to work on. So let me say a little bit more on regulating access, because there is an analogy with the old-style regulation. A standard issue about self-preferencing is basically you have some consumers who have access to the infrastructure, and then the infrastructure gives them access to an app or an app store, okay? And the idea, for example, is that you might actually give a free access to the core infrastructure, say to Apple, for example, to iOS, to the iOS. You give access to a rival app store, and then the consumer will have a lot of choice. But the big impact, of course, is that the core services will have to be paid by charging the consumer, because you won't make money on complementary services anymore. So there will be this, let me be a bit more precise. So actually, I'm not going to take an app store, I'm going to assume a single app. You have a consumer who has a willingness to pay CETA for the app, for the in-house app. And so, but we'll access this app through the core. The rival app is a little bit more efficient. So actually it's offering a surplus CETA plus delta, and we'll charge some price P2 for the service. And the in-house app will charge at P1. Now, the question is whether the core is, at what price the core is going to give access to a rival app. The internal price is zero, of course, the transfer price internally is zero. But you can give you can have a linear access price small a or a fixed fee capital A. Okay. Now in general we prefer small a because that allows more entrants to enter in the app market because capital A will be like a fixed cost of entry. Also, capital A may be difficult to compute if you don't know the size of the market or all those kinds of things. Now, there may be, I'll come back to that, there may be some investment cost I, which is smaller than the extra benefit for society of having this rival app. So there's the issue about entry by the rival app. And in general, you will have some benefit B per consumer. So you might think about the benefit B as being a consumer benefit from core services. So in the old telecom example, that was you were using local communication, and the app was a long distance service, right? But now it's a bit different, and actually it makes a difference, is that the benefit from actually one more consumer may not be this consumer benefiting from the core service, but rather the app actually making money from advertising or from data collection or something else. And that's much more common nowadays, which means basically that the app has a negative cost, has a negative marginal cost. Okay, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The total value to be captured by is basically B, which is the benefit plus CETA plus delta. Okay, that's what you can capture, minus I if there is an investment cost. Okay, now, in a sense, that looks very much like the old style regulation of access that we developed in the 90s, but with a few twists. So let me maybe start with the competitive neutrality stuff. So let's go back to this thing. What happens when you change the access charge small a? Well, the conventional wisdom is that nothing happens, or very little happens. Why? Because when, say, you decrease A, the access charge, then you decrease the marginal cost of the rival app, but you also decrease the opportunity costs of the in-house app. Okay, so if the access charge is smaller, then the core is going to be a more aggressive competitor because it gets very little money on access. At the same time, the rival app is also going to be more aggressive because its marginal cost is smaller. And on that, it has no impact. So in that sense, the access charge is neutral. Okay. Well, let me issue a few caveats. And by the way, if you reduce the access charge, you can make it up by increasing P0. So not only the competition between the apps is not going to change, but on top of that, you can make up by increasing P0 in general. Now, some caveats. The first caveat is that you might say, okay, let's let the platform choose the access charge. Okay. Now, once the rival app has entered, it's going to choose an access charge like delta, equal to delta, right? So it's basically going to capture the extra profit of the entrant. So that's what's going to happen. But of course, if the investment cost for the rival app is positive, then it's basically it's going to expropriate the innovator, and then there will be no entry. Now, notice that there is a tension ex post and ex ante, because ex ante, the platform is very happy to commit not to charge more than delta minus I, because that will allow the rival app to enter, whereas, if there is no such commitment. So actually, the regulator is helping the platform in some way, helping ex ante, not ex post, by capping the access price. The other thing that may happen, which violates this neutrality stuff, is a ZLB, zero lower bound. This is not a macro talk, but the ZLB is very important in I/O. It's very hard to charge negative prices because of arbitrage. And what happens is when you start lowering the access price, then you are going to basically face the zero price constraint. And then this neutrality will break down, because you'll get to that bound where you cannot reduce the price even further. And that will be particularly true in the second case, in which there's a profit from the consumer using the app, because in that case, the rival app is going to make a lot of profit because it's going to capture the consumer, is going to get B and possibly delta on top of that. So if you lower the access charge, you are going to end up with basically the price constraint, the zero bound constraint. And that's going to imply lots of things. So, and that's actually what's well known in regulation, which is that you are going to substitute an access to the access charge, which has reached its limit. You are going to substitute basically non-price foreclosure. And that's that whole debate about telecoms. There was a huge amount of non-price foreclosure. And the same thing is going to happen here. And that relates to a number of complaints against many of those giants. So I don't know. So what I'm saying is that this idea that the access charge is neutral, it's like, again, it's like Modigliani Miller in a sense. It gives you a good idea of what's going on, but then when you dig a bit further, you notice that it's not quite like that. Okay. Defensive merger. So defensive merger, some of you in the room actually have much more expertise than I do. So this standard merger review is targeting substitutes with the standard tools. But what we have seen more and more in the drug industry, but also in the tech industry, is that the big guys are purchasing emerging firms. And the burden of proof has been very difficult for authorities. How can you prove that it's an anti-competitive merger? It's impossible. The standard example of WhatsApp and Instagram being purchased by Facebook, there was no data, and that's true for many things. And by the way, that gives an incentive actually for the platforms to acquire very early to make sure there is no data around. And the other issue which I want to mention is that should we just focus on substitutes, given that in the digital world, at least, the attack is often from the side rather than frontal. I mean, because of network scientists, it's not easy to attack Facebook like this. And you may want to produce a complement or something like that, and then Spotify, for example, and then you move into the social network business. And, the products change over time, and that's very important. Now, I don't know if I'm right. I'm in favor of reversing the burden of proof for the dominant platforms. And actually, that's what the DMA does. I mean, basically, the gatekeeper will have to notify their acquisition, and there can be some objections to the merger. Now, I understand there are efficiency defenses as well. Some of them I don't think are very convincing. So, for example, we are doing this merger because we need talent. We are going to purchase talent. I mean, this talent will not go unemployed anyway. If it doesn't go to Facebook, it will go to Microsoft or whatever. I mean, come on. They also say, oh yeah, but if you cannot sell out to a big firm, you kill the exit mechanism in venture capital. Well, first, we don't know whether the highest bidder is necessarily the socially desirable acquirer. But there are also other exit mechanisms, like an IPO. I understand it's less common, but you also have other platforms. We may not want to go too far, because if we say every big platform, none of the big platforms could be possibly a competitor, given this broad notion that complements actually may become substitutes, then you may actually kill the acquisition market. But, if they tell you we are buying because it's a complement, one of the things you can object is, okay, but do you really need to acquire? If you are worried about double marginalization, do you need to acquire this firm? Or can't you just have some kind of, there are, of course, possible antitrust concerns, but theoretically, you could agree on a price cap. Actually, if you have two complements, you can achieve exactly the same thing as integration by basically committing to price caps, because you avoid double marginalization that way. And then, of course, in some cases, you want to provide a seamless experience, and that's quite right. Okay, so that's actually a big issue. Collective agreements, that's another important thing on which we have to give some advice. So competitors may get together for joint marketing or joint standard setting for collective negotiation. So the collective negotiation will be more on the other side, on the buyer side. And we always worry about whether it's exercise of countervailing power, which might not be bad, or it's a boycott, of course, and boycotts are illegal, of course. And for all those things, we need to have some kind of advice for decision makers on what to do. And I think much more work is needed on that. So a small start we did with Josh on trying to look for rules which do not require any information, and make it less likely that agreements be anti-competitive. So uses of things like independent licensing for patent pools, price commitment prior to the finalization of the standard in the case of standards, and the standard essential patent stuff. But that kind of stuff that we need to develop in order to make it easier for antitrust authorities to deal with those cases, given they don't have much time to decide, they may not have the expertise, and especially they may not have the data. You have patents, you create a patent pool. What are your data to decide whether are substitute or complements, and are they going to test your substitutes and complements, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's actually kind of difficult. Okay, same thing here. Common ownership. that will be discussed. And, this is, we don't need any new law, by the way, to fight common ownership abuses, because we already have the laws. We have been having them for a long time. But we need guidelines. And, some people have made proposals on that. So, and again, it starts with a good idea. You want, if you have mutual funds, you want to have diversification, and you want to, it's good for the consumers. At the same time, of course, you can create cartels here and there. So we need to have rules which are going to make sure that common ownership is not going to come in the way of that. Data. Well, there are lots of issues with data barriers to entry, relationship to privacy, and so on. Now, economists have worked a fair amount on price discrimination, third-degree price discrimination by those firms which have a lot of data, because they know your willingness to pay, and therefore they can charge you a price which is correspond to your willingness to pay, basically extract your surplus. That may become more difficult with the Digital Market Act, where gatekeepers may be prohibited from reusing internal data. So that's standard third-degree price discrimination. There's also the issue about the exploitation of cognitive weaknesses and internalities. So we're worried about the platform unloading lemons onto people who don't have a clue, and it's not very hard. People, the platform, I'm sure, know quite well that I don't have a clue about most of the stuff, and you can exploit me very easily and dump their lemons. But there's the issue about using impulsiveness. We click all the time, or we want to buy and ship fast and blah blah blah, and of course they use that quite a lot. By the way, another act in Europe, which is called the Artificial Intelligence Act, which is not enacted yet, will forbid any action that will circumvent the user's free will. Now, what does it mean? Of course, that has been existing for a long time. Every French bakery is actually putting some smell of croissant in the street, and that's really circumventing your free will, right? So I don't know exactly what they mean by that, but that sounds important. And there are other traditional issues, the breakdown of insurance, because there's Hirschleifer, the right to be forgotten, the algorithmic fairness. I mean, lots of stuff we should be working on and bring solution. I don't know about the US, but in Europe, it's very popular to think about data trust. I mean, in a sense, data is ultimate public good, right? We would like those data to be public, consistent with privacy, of course, and therefore we should have data pool. There's a worry, and Google and so on might have checked that actually they have invested to get those data. Other people think that the consumers have invested to give their data, but anyway. But then, how do you determine, assuming that you solve the privacy issue, how do you determine the access to this data pool? Will it be for free? But then how do you reward the contributors to this data pool? If you can reward them, what price? What is the value of data? I mean, we know it's highly consumer specific, highly format specific, and then the analysis is very important. But the analysis, I guess everybody will agree, there will be a property right on that. The sixth point is industrial policy, which is really making a comeback. And that's another thing we should be working on, I think. Whether we like it or not, it's going to exist, and we have to make it more efficient. So, okay, so let me, that will take too long, so let me stop here.